Hey guys, today we're gonna look at an example on how to create a two-way portal door in A-frame. So I'm gonna show you an example. The idea is that you have this door, this portal door, that is peeking into another environment, and once you walk through this portal door, like so, you'll be put it into the environment that the door leads to, which is the one with a lot of forest like this. So here I first have a very simple HTML page setup. I've already imported some of the script that I'll be using that will help me create this door, and I also have the environment of the page preset. So this environment variable with preset default is taken from A-frame environment component by face, and I'm just using a default scene instead of creating my own just to make things simple. So I've also have a basic JavaScript page setup that we will use later to implement the logic on how to switch the environment when we walk through the door. First, we want to create a player entity who we can control using the up and down and the sideways keyboard keys that will help us move through the portal. And to do that, we will first create an entity and we'll ID it player. So let's create an entity in A-frame and we'll call that player. And to implement the up and down motion or movement control, I'm going to use a movement control library from this A-frame extras script by Don McCurdy, and this will allow me to control the player using, the up and down keys of the keyboard. So I just have to specify movement controls equal. So I will explain what this is. Constraint to navigation mesh is a feature in this movement controls that will allow, or that will make sure that, let's say the player doesn't go through walls, for instance. That is constrained to the laws of physics. And I'm also going to specify this thing called dynamic body for the player. And dynamic body is a component taken from A-frame physics system, also by Don McCurdy, and basically that will help us keep track of the position of the player as we move the player around, which will we have to use to implement the logic of the environment changing later. So to implement dynamic body, we need to give it a shape, and the default mass is 0. That's why I'm going to change it to, or the default mass is 5, but I'm going to change it to 0, because if the default mass is 5, then based on the library, the player will then fall through the floor due to gravity. So now that I've had my player, I also need to add in a camera component to this player, since that is what we will use as our eyes to see. So we are going to call this entity camera, and it's a camera with our specified position 0, 1.6, 9. 1.6 is the y-axis, so that's how high our camera is going to be. And the controls pointer, lock, and equal true. And then that's it for our camera. So this is our player. Let's see how that looks. So this is the default environment. There hasn't been a portal door yet since we haven't created it, but now that we have a player, we can move it up and down like so. and I am controlling this player with my up and down and sideway keys. Now that I have my player, I can start to set up a portal door. So again, we create another entity, and a portal door is rectangular in nature, so I'm going to specify that as the entity's geometry component. But first we need to ID this so we can interact with it. So I'm going to ID that as portal1 and set the geometry to be and then we set the rotation to empty since we don't need the door to rotate. And now to get kind of a portal like material that helps us peek into another world, we can modify the material component of this entity by setting its shader and panel. For shader, we will specify that as portal, which is a built-in type, and for portal, and for panel is kind of what is the image that is displayed on the door. So to get it to peek into another world, we need to make sure to set the image as the image of the next environment. So in the example, it is the forest environment. And to do this, you can take a screenshot of that environment and just upload that as a picture, which I've already done here. Create an image using that, specifying a source, and you just have to set this ID to the panel like so. Texture. So aframe has a special screenshot capability where you use Control-Alt-Shift-S that will allow you to take an equirectangular panorama screenshot of your environment, which will help us create a more realistic portal-like peek. If you just take a regular screenshot of a regular picture, say this size, the door would really distort the image and it will look less natural. So that's that, and then I'm just gonna input some extraneous stylistic information now that you can modify and play around with to your liking, but it's not really necessary to know for this tutorial. So after inputting these extra stylistic, and specify the position to your liking as well. These other stylistic details, I have a portal door. Yay! And as you can see, the portal helps you peek into another world accordingly. So now we can start modifying our JavaScript and implementing the logic for the environmental switching. For the logic of the environment switching, I'm going to keep track of my player, and when the player reaches the door at a certain position, I'm going to change the environment accordingly. For this tutorial, I'm not putting my player in an entirely new HTML page, which is an option. I'm just gonna get the current scene and changing its environment component. So first, I need to get my player element so I can track its position. To do that, just have to do document.querySelector and specify the ID, which is player. I'm also gonna need to gather the scene so I can change its environment component. So scene 1. and I need to get my portal door. Perfect. To keep track of the position, I'm going to listen to whenever the position changes, and every time the position changes of my player, I will check if the position is at the environment switching point, and I'll switch accordingly. So to keep track of the position changing, we are going to do dot, gonna add for an event listener, and I'm gonna listen for a component changed. Event. And make sure that I don't forget the brackets. So if the environment that was changed is the position, then so this is where my logic comes in. I've recorded the position X and Z of the player for easier access. I don't really need to record the Y since I don't need to check for it, as the door and the player is on the same plane, so the Y will be the same regardless. I've also tested this and checked beforehand that when the player is between position 0 and 3 for X, and between -10 and -8 for Z, that's when the player is at the door. So I'm going to input that here in an if statement. So since this portal is two-way, so you can go to the forest environment, and then from the forest environment you can go to the same portal to go back to the default environment. I need to keep track of which environment the player is in so that I can switch to the new environment correctly. And in order to do that, I'm gonna create two Boolean variables called environment1, which denotes my default environment, and environment2 to denote my forest environment. And I'm setting it out here since starting out the player will be in environment 1 and not in environment 2. So when the player is at the door, then we can check if the player is in environment 1 or 2. So if player is in environment 1, then we would need to set the environment to the forest. So what we can do here is create a new variable called environment name, which is a string, and we'll feed the string into our modification code. So here I'm gonna set my environment name to be forest, and if the player is in environment 2, then I will set environment name to be default. Since environment 2, it means that they're in the forest. Okay, now I have my environment name. I can set the attribute. So using my scene element right here, I will do dot set attribute, specify the attribute that I want to set, environment, and specify what I want to set it to, which is environment name. And then, so one of the reasons why I specified the Z position to be a range instead of a hard value, such as if Z equal certain value, is because sometimes the position of the player can vary by, let's say, 0.05 point, and if it misses that mark, then the code wouldn't know to switch the environment. Hence why I set it to be a range. However, since the player can take position, multiple Z position within this range, the code will, or the environment will switch continuously as long as they are in this range. So I'm going to have another variable called environment changed, and in here, once I set the environment, I'm gonna set environment changed equal to true, and I'm gonna check here that you can only switch the environment if the environment has not changed, so not environment changed. So this will make sure that even if the player is, let's say, at -10 or at -9, and then again at -8.5, then it will not be switching continuously. I'm going to show you a demo of what we already have so far. So here we have the portal, and once we walk through it, we are in the forest environment. Yay! But we also want to be able to walk back through this door and be returned to our default environment. And for that, we would need to implement some extra logic and see how we could do that. So first, we know that if our position Z is greater than 8, then we will be in, I've checked beforehand, but we will be in kind of the default environment. Because once we go past that, past -10, then we'll be in the forest environment. So here we'll check if position Z is greater than -8, and we know that this is in default environment. So if it's in default environment, then we want to first do environment 1 is true, environment 2 is false. This is also resetting our environment 1 and 2 variables so that when we walk through the door again, we know which environment we're in, so we can switch to the right environment next time. And we're also going to reset environment change is equal to false again, so that we can go back into this loop. And if position Z is less than -10, then we know that we are in the forest. So environment 1 is false, environment 2 is true, and again, reset the environment change variable to false. Perfect. Changed. But what we also want is, when we are in the default environment, we want to have the portal door to be leading to the forest. So we would need to take this portal 1 element and change its attribute. So to do that, we do, again, set attribute, specify the attribute that we want to set, and then specify what we want to set it to. So I'm going to set it to forest, make sure that the door goes to forest environment, and here once we're in the forest, we want the door leading back to default environment, so we're gonna do default texture. These IDs come from these assets right here, forest texture and default texture, that I've already preset beforehand. So this should be the final of our logic, and let's see what our final program is like. So we walk through this door. Bam, with the forest. And when we turn around, we can see that the portal door that leads back to the default environment. So this makes it the two-way portal door, and if we walk back through it, bam, we're back at the default. So that's it. You know, there's certainly ways that we can improve this code. First, the environment, or the material of our door is rather kind of unrealistic. The environment doesn't line up correctly, so when we walk through it, the trees change and the background and the color change. So we can take a look at ways on how to make this material more realistic and more aligned. And another things that we could improve upon is how to make the transition more seamless. Right now, it's just as if we walk through it and the environment change. That we had a blanket over us and then we take it off and we're in a new environment. But we want to be able to really walk through the door and seeing that environment change. So that will be ways that we can improve the program for next time.